Welcome to What Matters Water TV and Podcast. The Colorado River is one of the most important rivers in the United States. It's been in the news a lot lately because of the drought and how it's affecting people and businesses that count on it for drinking water. I'm Charlie Wilson, and I'm excited to share with you this important webinar panel discussion on the collaborative approach to the Colorado River management being taken by the California water, tribal, and community leaders. On this special episode of What Matters Water TV and Podcast, our expert panel will talk about what is causing the crisis, how it's affecting our state and others, and most importantly, what can be done to prevent it from getting worse. So please join us as we explore this important issue. Our panel today is a very diverse set of stakeholders who are going to discuss efforts to find the collaborative solutions throughout the basin and how this could shape the future of Western water for years to come. For this is the first in what we also expect to be, because of the issue, an anticipated series on the Colorado River. And to help me in today's conversation, let me introduce our complete lineup, and then I'm going to hand it over to a special guest to handle the MC duties today, given his expertise on the Colorado River. So with us today, our experts are David Palumbo. David is the Deputy Commissioner for Operations of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. In that role, David oversees operations in Reclamation's 5 regions: the Native American and International Affairs Office, the Technical Service Center, Hydropower Office and Dam Safety, Office Design, Estimating, Construction. Seems like David does a whole bunch of everything around the Colorado. Prior to his appointment as Deputy Commissioner, David oversaw the complex water and power programs in the Lower Colorado region, including Hoover Dam operations. Needless to say, David is deeply familiar with the river and its challenges, and I'm very pleased, David, that you're with us today. Also, Michael Cohen. Michael is a returned guest to the Southern California Water Coalition. Michael is a senior research associate at the Pacific Institute. Mr. Cohen's focus is on water use on the Colorado River Basin and Delta region in the restoration of the Salton Sea ecosystems, so a combination of water issues and major water issues for Southern California. He is the lead author of several Pacific Institute reports on the Salton Sea and the Colorado River, and he has contributed to several Pacific Institute reports on water use. With us today as well is Chairman Thomas Tortez Jr. He is the tribal chairman for the Torres Martinez Desert Cahuilla Indians, where he serves as principal advisor to the tribal council on all matters pertaining to the Torres Martinez tribe. Under Mr. Torres, or Chairman Torres's leadership, the tribe has been trying for several years to work out deals with the United States as compensation for land that was submerged when the Colorado River Irrigation Aqueduct broke back in 1905. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, 1905, and that is what formed the Salton Sea. So Chairman Torres is deeply familiar with issues along the river and with the Salton Sea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being with us today. Also, Henry Martinez, General Manager with the Imperial Irrigation District. Henry serves as Imperial's Chief Executive and manages the largest irrigation district in the United States and the 3rd largest public power provider in the state of California. A return guest, and you know him well, Adel Hagekhalil, General Manager and Chief Executive Officer of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the largest wholesale drinking water agency in the country, serving roughly 19 million people and a 26-member public agency board of directors. Sandy Kerl is the General Manager of the San Diego County Water Authority. She is one of those member agencies of the Metropolitan Water District, and she provides wholesale water supplies to more than 24 member agencies herself in the San Diego County area. That's 3.3 million people and $240 billion in regional economic activity in San Diego County. And to serve as our MC for the day, and then I'm going to transition to him, but we're very pleased to have with us Chris Harris, who is currently the Executive Director of the Colorado River Board of California, and he has been with this board since August of 2000. Chris is involved in the board's major programs and activities associated with protecting and managing California rights and interests in the Colorado River water and hydropower supplies. Given Chris's role with the River Board, he is our moderator today. He is much deeper in the Colorado River and its nuances. Chris, thank you so very much for being with us today and serving as our MC. Chris, the floor is now yours to take us through today's conversation.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Good morning to all of you, and I'm delighted and privileged to be with this panel. I do have a few opening slides and really just kind of to set the stage for today's conversation. And I really want to kind of move through it fast because I really think everybody wants to hear more from our panelists, including myself. First of all, just to orient everybody, here's Reclamation's up-to-date map of the Colorado River Basin and a couple of key things to keep in mind as we have our discussion today. One, most of the municipal use of Colorado River water is actually outside of the geographical boundaries of the Colorado River Basin. So as you look at this, you can see the crosshatched areas kind of all around the basin, both in the upper basin and the lower basin. And those are large metropolitan areas or also agricultural water use areas outside of the physical boundary of the Colorado River Basin that actually use Colorado River water. So it's important to keep that in context. Obviously, Las Vegas and Phoenix are two of the larger metropolitan centers within the basin, but largely the rest of the larger metropolitan areas that use Colorado River water are outside of the basin. There's also 5.5 million million acres of agricultural lands that are dependent upon the water supply of this basin. And then an incredible amount of natural and cultural resources are dependent upon the river's annual water supply. That you have native and non-native species, habitats. We have a large number of endangered species that are managed in the Colorado River Basin. So anyway, and then you can see the geographic dividing line between the upper basin and the lower basin up there in that kind of Four Corners region. That's important in the context of our discussions going forward. We do have 4 states in the upper Colorado River Basin, and then the 3 lower basin states of Arizona, California, and Nevada, with the upper basin states of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Where are we today? In 2022, the 7 states in the United States did agree, because of the rapid decline in storage in both Lake Powell and in Lake Mead, that we needed to adjust the annual release from Glen Canyon Dam in 2022, and we did so. We dropped it from a 7.48 million acre foot release in 2022 down to a 7 million acre foot release. Additionally, the upper basin states and the Bureau of Reclamation worked together to shift 500,000 acre feet from facilities upstream of Lake Powell down to Lake Powell. Thus, we essentially put 1 million acre feet of additional water supply that was able to be retained in Lake Powell and protect Lake Powell from declining below critical elevations where they could not generate hydropower and it could limit releases out of Glen Canyon Dam. At the same time, 2022 was also a shortage condition for Lake Mead operations, which meant that not only did we have drought contingency plan contributions and binational contributions from Mexico, but we also now had shortage reductions from Arizona and Nevada. This limited the amount of water that could be released out of Lake Mead. Going into 2023, the news doesn't get any better. The August 24-month study that Reclamation released that helps guide development of the water year 2023 operating plan indicates we're likely to have another 7 million acre foot release out of Glen Canyon Dam in 23, and that Lake Mead operations will be further into the shortage condition, what we call a Tier 2A. And we still have ongoing drought contingency plan and binational Minute 323 contributions. And we believe it's likely that there may be another upper basin drought operations release where they would again shift water from upstream facilities down to Powell to help protect critical elevations in Lake Powell. Next slide, please. And I don't want you to focus too much on this, but this is what we call the 30-year, it's a 2-year 24-month projection of conditions in the reservoirs, and it's based on a 30-year history of potential hydrologies. I think one important point is to acknowledge there are additional hydrologies out there that aren't included in that 30-year series. What I've marked is where we could be by the end of December in 2023. That's what the blue arrow indicates. And the red dashed line is the minimum probable projected elevation in Lake Powell. And you can see that is something below the minimum power pool elevation of 3490. And I think the point to be made here is without significant action by the basin states and reclamation to, drought operations releases, reduce water uses, et cetera, we could be in that position by December of 2023. And here's Lake Mead. And again, barring significant water use reductions by the 7 Colorado River Basin states and Mexico and additional operational actions that could be taken by reclamation, this also is where we could be in December 2023 for Lake Mead. And you can see that's below elevation 1025. And that's profoundly concerning for all of us. You can see over on the side what that means from a storage condition in the reservoir. So I think all of us right now are single-mindedly focused on what we can do collectively among all of the stakeholders in the basin to help stabilize this increasingly fragile reservoir system that we have. And it's an incredibly valuable resource to all of us, particularly all of us in California. This is a very, very big deal. Just to graphically show you the time span over the past 22 years. So the panel on the left is Lake Mead and the Overton arm, Virgin River arm of Lake Mead in 2000, when the reservoir was essentially 95% of capacity. Now the middle panel is 2021. And you can see there's been a significant decline in Mead's total storage. And then finally, this is relatively current, the panel on the right. So it shows quite starkly the condition of Lake Mead. And Lake Powell similarly looks the same way as well, marked decline. Next slide, please. Okay, my last slide, and then we're going to get the panel involved. Where do we go from here? And this is going to be the focus of the discussion for the remaining portion of the webinar today. First, we've got short term, 2023 through 2026. We've got a 4-year period where we have got to stabilize the reservoir system to the extent that we can. And how can we do that? Reclamation's initial modeling indicates that right now we need something between 2 and 4 million acre feet of additional water conservation each year on top of the existing 2007 guideline shortage reductions, the 2019 drought contingency plan contributions, and the 2017 Minute 323 binational contributions from our partner Mexico. And at the same time, folks, we've also got to be able to move quite smartly and quickly into developing the post-2026 framework for the next set of operating guidelines, because our 2007 guidelines expire December of 2026. So for the long term, what does that mean? What does it mean, this post-2026 framework? We've got to address the supply and demand imbalance. Right now, we're using more water each year than is replenished by precipitation and so forth. And in fact, we're even using up storage in our large reservoir system. We need to continue to be able to provide water supply reliability and certainty in the face of aridification and climate change. I don't know that it's actually accurate any longer to talk about drought. It's a change in our climate is leading to a drying out and a reduction in average annual precipitation, runoff, and inflow into the reservoir system. So it's really an aridification and climate change impact. And it may be on a continuum where we're not going to reach a new normal. It may continue to change over time, and we're going to have to become very adept at being adaptable and flexible. And at the same time, we've got to continue to meet our environmental obligations and commitments. And I think now what we have is the opportunity for each of our panelists to spend a minute or two and just not only introduce themselves, but to describe their unique perspective and how their role and responsibility in dealing with managing California's use of Colorado River water supplies or protecting their own interests and needs going forward in these very challenging times. And I'll just start here with the Jeopardy squares. Adel, why don't you start us off?
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. And thank you to the Southern California Water Coalition and Charlie and his team. Honored to be with this team panel. This is a timely discussion. And, I've joined Metropolitan close to now coming to a year and a half, year plus few months. And I think to me, that's a great opportunity because I come with this holistic approach of water management, smart water management, the one water management approach. And we're facing climate change, as I've said when I came in, is we need to change how we manage water across our region in Southern California, but also across the entire basin, Colorado River Basin, to adapt to this changing climate, the acidification we're talking about. Every watershed, every person and every agency in every state in the Colorado River Basin needs to figure out a way how we can manage water and reduce the waste of water. Everything has to be conserved. We need to be responsible of how we use water. And I said that in Santa Fe. I said, if you have the right for water, it doesn't give you the right to waste water. We have a responsibility as a holistic region to make sure that we're working together in every way to conserve water and shore up our storage and to really prepare ourselves for the future. And that's really what I'm looking at. And just to share with an example, Metropolitan imports water from two regions. Although the water we're consuming today, half of it is locally sourced in Southern California, but we have the State Water Project in Northern California. And we have seen this, what we're dealing with in the Colorado in the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. And the last 3 years, we've had 0 allocation, 5% allocation from the State Water Project. And in April of this year, in June, we had to take actions because the water we had available to us through health and safety was not enough to allow us to stretch and supply water for 6 million people for some of our member agencies in western part of our region. So we had to declare an emergency and conduct emergency conservation measures that basically banned watering almost and provided allocation in some areas or banned watering except for 1 day a week. We wanted to reduce our water consumption by 35% to stretch our reserves and water till the end of the year. The good news, we're able to respond as we always respond. We're close to over 40% reduction in that area. And I see the same thing happening here. I mean, I'm seeing the supply coming from the Colorado River facing the same strain. And just tell you, we're seeing the rain, but we're not seeing the runoff. Yep. That's a big issue. But Metropolitan has for a long time invested a lot in conservation. I think to me is these unprecedented time require us to do creative and unprecedented actions. And I use the term now, I use the one water term, but I'm shifting to something called smart water management. We need to be smart how we manage water nowadays. And we need to adapt to that. And that's for me is critical. But we've done a lot of conservation in Southern California. We've done a lot of work investing in replacing turf with native plants. We are actually working on a largest recycled water program down in Southern California, down in Carson, to create 150 million gallons a day that can be recycled and reused to offset dependence on water from the Colorado and from the state water project. But more needs to be done, and more needs to be done together. Well, no one should be left behind. And I'm just looking forward to continuing to work together. And that's why I'm so proud of the MOU that we signed with the folks in Las Vegas, Denver, and other places, and asking everyone to join in signing on this MOU, where it talks about best practices for water conservation in every region, especially in the Colorado River Basin. And I think there's a lot more agencies are joining us. And the stakes are so high. The stakes are so high for us. And that's why I'm proud what was done yesterday by the California board for the Colorado River, and Chris and the team and everyone, Henry and everyone who's been involved in this effort. We have been working in California behind the scenes, working hard to find a way how we can save Lake Mead, how we can shore up Lake Mead and do the cuts that we need to do. But it can't be done alone. We need to have other people partnering with us. That's why we're so proud of the efforts by the federal government on the funding that came in through the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure funding. We're proud of the relationship we have with the Bureau of Reclamation and Interior. We need to do more in terms of investing. And I'm telling you, we're ready to respond, as you saw in the letter and the offer we have for the 400,000 acre feet of cuts that we're willing to do. But that's something we all have to continue working together. All of us are in this together. And I'm the optimist. I know a lot of people were pessimists with Santa Fe. I'm the optimist because we need to do that together and look forward to finding not only reduction in consumption, but new ideas, creative ideas to save water, whether it's new supplies through recycled water, groundwater remediation, storage, but also new ideas in, lining canals, as we've done in the past through the All-American Canal, covering systems to create energy, but reduce evaporation. All these ideas, I was in Yuma yesterday, and I saw what's possible. And I'm optimistic, and hopefully today we can show the work that we need to do together.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen, share your thoughts with us briefly, if you be so kind.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to Charlie and Southern California Water Coalition for inviting me back. After the last one, I wasn't sure whether that invitation was going to get extended again. So work for the Pacific Institute. We've been looking at water use, water conservation in both the urban and agricultural sectors. And actually in 2 weeks, our 35th anniversary. And speaking of history, about 30 years ago, the Institute prepared a report for the EPA talking about the impacts of climate change on the Colorado River Basin. And Peter Glick back then was looking at some of the emission scenarios and saying we could be looking at a 20% reduction in flows on the Colorado River. And sure enough, 30 years later, that's what we're looking at.
Yeah.
And just to emphasize a little bit what Chris was talking about in his introduction, that's caused the world of hurt that we're seeing. So it's not that demands have been increasing in the basin, it's that supply is declining. And in fact, a lot of the demands have been decreasing in the basin, thanks to the efforts of Metropolitan and on the agricultural sector in IID and other agricultural districts as well. Water use is flat or going down. Metropolitan, I think, has reduced total water use by more than 400,000 acre feet, and despite adding 4 million additional people over the past 20 years and seeing tremendous economic growth. So there's been a real decoupling between water use and economic productivity. So that, I think, is a really positive sign. But what we've been looking at is how do we achieve more and how do we achieve this resilience in the basin? So I'm at risk again of ever being invited back and be a little provocative as we move through some of the questions. So I live close to the headwaters of the Colorado River up here in Colorado, and Upper Basin has looked south and wondered what's actually going on with the lower basin, the lower division states, with overruns in times of this continuing crisis. So back in 2002, one of the driest years on the river, lower basin in California, California in particular used 5.3 million acre feet in 2002 when the upper basin was in crisis. So we're looking at some of the overuse in the lower basin, overruns this year as well. The optics of that are challenging, But I do want to commend California and Chris and Adel and Henry and others that contributed to this 400,000 acre foot promise that came out just yesterday for actually putting water on the table. The first state to actually put real water on the table. So we commend you for that. Let me wrap up there, and then I think as we move through the questions, I'll get to some other points.
Thanks very much, Michael. Deputy Commissioner Palumbo, we'd love to get a few minutes of the perspective here.
Thank you, Chris. It's wonderful to be with you all on this panel and to be with the group here on this webinar. I'll start off with a little doom and gloom. Well, first of all, I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Operations with the Bureau of Reclamation. Commissioner Tootin sends her regards. She is very engaged in the Colorado River Basin, as everybody knows, and wanted me to make sure that I reflected her interest in regards to you all. Let me start off with just talking about the phenomena that we're seeing across the West. I think it will help set the stage for what we need to do in the Colorado River Basin. The phenomena as a function of climate change, we have increased temperatures. Those increased temperatures are increasing the evaporation and transpiration in basins across the West. That has the effect of reducing soil moisture. So even when we get decent precipitation, we have low runoff into our reservoirs. For example, in the Colorado River Basin in 2021, we had 90% of the median snow water equivalent materialize in the basin at the end of March. That runoff into the reservoirs as a result of that snowpack, 90%, was only 30% of average into the basin. And that is a direct result of climate change forced increased temperatures. And if you look at projections on increased temperatures, it's pretty daunting. The slope of that line is continuing to rise. The reason why I say that and frame it up this way is what you indicated initially, Chris, with irrigation. That's the reality that we're dealing with right now. And we really need to be, what I like to say, supply smart. We need to understand what's coming into the basin and tailoring our demands, being very demand wise based on what the inflow projections are. I'll mention one other thing and stop there. I know we'll get into this a little bit more. So how do we work within that framework? It's doing it together, as Adel said. It's every state, it's every sector, whether it's municipal or ag, and whether it's upper basin or lower basin. We all need to do this together and work through, again, being supply smart and demand wise, and structure our activities around really the new reality of the Colorado River Basin. And I will acknowledge what was mentioned with respect to, again, long-term projections. We've known this for quite some time, and we need to, again, tailor our actions to be respectful of where supplies are headed. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, David. Good morning, Sandy. How about sharing San Diego County Water Authority's perspective?
Great. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present as the general manager for the San Diego County Water Authority. We are the region's wholesaler of water, and as was said, we have 24 member agency. About 2/3 of our supplies come from the Colorado River, so we have a very high stake in the basin issues. And I must add that those supplies are conserved water we received through the 2003 quantification settlement agreement. And I'm really pleased to be here today with my colleagues so that we can really share our unique perspectives and talk about where we're aligned on the challenges on the river. And the challenges are super tough, as you've already heard, but I think we have before us an opportunity to continue to work together and find solutions that will benefit the entire river system, not only today, but really for the long term. And I think we need to be thinking about that long term because we've known for a long time we've had challenges. This is the opportunity to solve it. I'd like to share that San Diego region has spent the last 3 decades investing in building water resiliency through supply diversification. And that has been a combination of conservation and collaboration, like with the QSA, and doing it in a way that is meant to be mutually beneficial with our partners. And I believe that our shared experience and collaboration with the QSA really can provide a model and an opportunity for how we can do things going further. I would say from my perspective, we've worked together on the near-term answers and plans and the long-term operations for the river. As we do that, really 3 things, key things that I wanted to just say I think are imperative. The first is that we balance the impacts of all water users so that we can continue to serve our communities while protecting the environment. And the Salton Sea is one example. And funding for this must be provided, it must be fair, and it must be adequate for the conservation that will need to be done. Secondly, looking forward, we must uphold the law of the river and its system of priority rights, recognizing the importance of the quantification settlement agreement, which is built on conservation and has been the tool for California to manage its use on the river and to continue to protect the Salton Sea. And then thirdly, I think it's also important that participation in the intentionally created surplus program in Lake Mead be expanded to bolster storage. I think that's a huge opportunity. I just want to finish by saying that I know we've all worked really hard to communicate and to be good stewards of the Colorado River that we share. In the San Diego region, we promote efficient water use and conservation, but there's certainly more that we can do, and we're going to continue to focus on that because that is key. I look forward to our dialogue today and exploring our unique perspectives as we work through all of these challenges, and again, appreciate the opportunity to be part of the panel.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Nice to hear from you. Good morning, Mr. Martinez. Tell us about the Imperial Irrigation District and yourself and where we go from here.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to the Southern California Water Coalition for the invitation. Representing here the Imperial Irrigation District. As you know, we're one of the oldest irrigation districts here in California and also in the United States, over 110 years in existence, and basically been in business for quite a number of years. First of all, I want to indicate to you that as my background has really been moving between urban communities, living in urban communities, mountain communities, and now in rural communities, gives me a different perspective in regards to this impacts of what water shortages bring about. Also, in my energy background, I kind of also think about the aspects of how water shortages impact not only the use of water, but also the production of power that is very vital for our economy here in the Western states. And so, and then on top of that, the Salton Sea becomes another element of what we think about in regards to what solutions may be brought about with the shortages that we're encountering. Since 97% of our water allocation irrigates roughly 500,000 acres of fertile land for food production, it is very important for us to keep in mind that this economy that we're have built over 110 years continues to thrive and continues to succeed, as well as taking care of the Salton Sea. And I want to thank many of our colleagues for being very upfront and supportive of the efforts of the Salton Sea. For many years, the district fought hard to bring this to the forefront and identified as a key element of success of the managing the river and the resources. And I'm happy to see that finally in this last few years, we've been able to make a positive traction on that effort and pay more attention to the aspects of something that's locally here affecting our community, and with additional plans to bring that forth, solutions to some of the problems we're finding. I think in general, what we're finding ourselves in a situation now is to really think, as Adel indicated, bringing new tools to the table to really kind of look at it from the perspective of how we can become more efficient in water use. We have a very robust and effective on-farm conservation program where basically we're increasing or maintaining the production levels of crops with less water, and it's been successfully implemented for several years now. And we see opportunities to increase that on-farm conservation program even further to make sure that, again, water utilization is effectively used and also maintain the crop production for the in general public. The other part that we're also looking at is how do we accommodate emerging technology, in essence, that also unfortunately sits here in our district area but requires water to implement as well. And so the balancing issues that we're trying to find now is how do we maintain the economy of agriculture lively and attractive as well as productive, but also bringing to the valley potentially additional industry that basically is fundamental to California, specifically lithium production and geothermal. Not necessarily competing, but in essence, it becomes an issue of also allocation of water use that is fundamental to make those industries also provide other resources to California and the Western United States. And I think the other part that I just want to also identify to you is that, as Sandy indicated, that, you know, as we see all these transitions and all the requirements going forward, is that the law of the river creates a very fundamental aspect as to how the water is managed and how the river is managed in the future. And I think this is one of the issues that we have to keep in mind going forward, that the law of the river has been created over many, many years of history and decisions that were made along the way. And then along as we consider new changes or adaptations to how water will be used in the future, that's considered, is identified, is addressed in a way that doesn't create more challenges to all of us going forward. The last thing we want to do is end up in a courtroom suspending all activities while the river crashes. And I think from that perspective, we just want to be careful not to ignore that part of the process. And then lastly, I just want to close that this is our only source of water for the district. So from that perspective, we're very concerned about the drop in elevation and ultimately at the point that water cannot be delivered to our district is just fundamentally a non-starter for us. So from that perspective, our board is very committed, and as it was announced yesterday, along with Metropolitan, the Palo Verde, and also Coachella Valley Water District, we have basically stepped up and committed ways to save water and leave that in the river for the future. So with that, I just want to close, and we'll get more discussion later, but I just want to point out that this is a monumental lift for us. But again, we see that as a priority for us to maintain the vitality of the valley here going forward.
Thank you very much for those comments and observations. Chairman Tortez, tell us about the Torres Martinez tribe and your perspective of from where you sit in Southern California.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for the Southern California Water Board to have me on here. It speaks volumes to have the tribe on here. As you know, my name is Thomas Torres Jr. I'm the current tribal chairman for the Torres Martinez Desert Cahuilla. I'm one of the many tribes that sit in the Colorado River Basin. You know, there are 14 local here, but in all, there are more than 30 federally recognized tribes that sit in the Colorado River Basin. As far as Torres Martinez, we have always been in here, you know, we believe since time immemorial, in this area, in this Coachella Valley and the southern part of the Colorado River. And our stories depict the Colorado River coming and going. And science tells us that the Colorado River overflow is an event that happens every 500 or so years for hundreds of thousands of years. And we have acknowledged that and put that in our stories and our histories, and our ancestors tell the stories of how the water comes. At the time, it was fresh water, bringing fresh water fish and life to the area. And as it recedes, we follow the water down with our villages with, walk-in wells. And so we lived in tune with the Colorado River as it came and left at the time. This last time that when the reservation was founded by the president in 1876, we had villages down there, and in 1905, everyone knows the Colorado aqueduct was breached and it flooded for 2 years, the town and the Cahuilla villages that were there. So over 100 years, we have, talked to the government about some kind of reconciliation. And I don't know if everyone knows, but in 2000, we filed a lawsuit against the United States government, and that ensued, and the Congress passed an act called the Torres Martinez Settlement Act, which affords us land which was flooded over 100 years before. The reservation now comprises 24,000 acres that is in and around the sea. 11,000 acres currently still exists under the sea at this time. So we ask, that the federal government continue to protect our interests, our rights, continue to uphold their federal trust issues for the tribal reservation, not only for Torres Martinez, but for the 30 Colorado River Basin tribes. Torres Martinez is a member of the Salton Sea Authority, a joint powers authority established under California law in 1993. And it was established to protect health, environment, and economic vitality in the Salton Sea and the surrounding area. And the Salton Sea Authority is comprised of the Coachella Valley Water District, Imperial County, Imperial Irrigation District, and Riverside County. So with that mission, we have restoration plans. We try to secure funding. We manage restoration projects. We advocate for state and federal policies to ensure protection of the critical resource and region. So again, back to the tribes. I'm glad and I appreciate that we were invited, to speak and publicly state, and I may speak for some of the tribes, and I haven't seen any on here, but I think inclusion is the key and what we fight for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we ask for a greater voice on the ongoing negotiations about water conservation. So this is key to be here at this webinar today. And I thank the Water Coalition for inviting me. So one of the other facts that is known is that the tribal recognized tribes under this Colorado River Basin, we hold less than a quarter of the Colorado River's rights, and even those that have majority of the rights in their reservation still lack the funding and infrastructure, so we can't even use the water at the allocation that was given to the tribes that even have that. So when we're talking about water compensation, we're all for it. It's something that the tribes have always lived with. We're here in the desert. We've always lived with water conservation. We live one with the environment. We still press the issue to the governments that be, that we speak of inclusion, and no longer the inclusion. We speak of inclusion, that we be at the table for the long-term management of the Colorado River. And even now, with this mandate that was published about the restrictions on the Colorado River states, and then I see in there that it mandates the tribes. Well, then the tribes need to be at the table. So and I can't go without saying about the Salton Sea. We've always advocated for the Salton Sea and the catastrophe of the sea, and it's attached to the Colorado River. It's getting less than 10 acre feet of water from the north where we are now. But as far as Colorado River allocation, the Torres Martinez, we sit on an aquifer that's arsenic contaminated. So we draw what we can from the aquifer. We've been advocating to try to get some of the Colorado River. We're one of the tribes that our water is still unquantified at this time. 2022, we're still asking that the government quantify the water that we're sitting on. But I think that's a legal battle. That's something that we're going to pursue and look forward to exercise our right. But again, thank you for inviting the Torres Martinez tribe, and I look forward to the questions and the narrative that we have and the rest of this webinar. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman Tortez. Okay, we've got about 45 minutes left, give or take. I mentioned in my opening slides, and several of you have talked about, the current challenge that we face in the Colorado River Basin, and it is monumental, and it's really acknowledging and then coming up with potential solutions that can help slow the rate of decline in both Lakes Powell and Meade. And to that end, Reclamation in, I guess it was May or June, did identify the 2 to 4 million acre feet that could potentially be necessary each year in water use reductions in order to stabilize the rate of decline of the two large reservoirs. And I think, all of us know that there are barriers to coming up with that enormous volume of reductions in water use. But having said that, if that's what we have to do, what are some of the ideas, the solutions that each of you has, or your perspectives about how we get there? In other words, how can we slow the rate of decline? How can we stabilize those two reservoirs and buy ourselves enough time to then start working on longer term solutions? And I'll go ahead and open it up. And maybe Michael, start with your sort of outside perspective, looking in.
So in the vein of being an outsider and provocative, one of the things that needs to happen is we need to start allocating evaporation from lower basin reservoirs. So the upper basin, those losses are allocated to the upper basin states. In the lower basin, on the order currently, as the reservoirs have dropped, something on the order of 800,000 acre feet per year are lost to the system, not charged to the lower basin states or to lower basin users. So Reclamation, and perhaps Dave will speak to this more, is starting the process of reviewing how to start allocating that lower basin evaporation from these reservoirs. One way to do it could be simply proportionally. So the proposal that came out yesterday from California is roughly a 10% reduction. Allocating evaporation would be another 10%. But that gets us much closer to the 2 to 4 million acre foot reduction that the commissioner called for. And that will be necessary until we really get a handle on climate change and the emissions that are driving the continuing loss of supply from the system. I was looking at some little factoids on water use in the lower basin. And apparently there's something like 4 million acres of lawns in California. There's one estimate that in LA County alone, something like 200,000 acre feet of water per year goes to irrigating lawns. And then there's, again, a lot of golf courses in Coachella Valley, 250,000 plus swimming pools in LA County. So as we're starting to come to grips with actually living in a desert or a semi-desert in California, and in coming to grips with the ravages of aridification and climate change, I think there's really been a paradigm shift that people are starting to think that water is not something that can simply be taken for granted. And we heard again from Metropolitan that there was a charge to their non-Colorado River users to reduce use by 35%. They reduced it by 40%. Up here in the upper basin in Colorado in 2012, yet another ravaging drought year, there was a charge to reduce water use in the Denver water service area. Customers exceeded that charge. So the public has really started to respond. We're seeing more and more removal of turf, of non-functional turf in particular, replacing that with xeriscape, with climate appropriate vegetation. That's the way the West is going to move because there's simply less water available. And then there's opportunities for in the agricultural sector. There's a lot of unlined canals out there. Those can be lined, and then incentives to shift crops to go to part season fallowing rather than irrigating alfalfa in the middle of the year in the hottest months when the yields aren't so great anyway. Pay some of those farmers to reduce those cuttings in the middle of the year, and that can help save quite a bit of water as well. So various financial incentives in both the urban and agricultural regions, combined with some regulations. So Southern Nevada Water Authority has really taken the lead in municipal area conservation and are now simply banning non-functional turf. They've for years been banning turf in front yards. So I think there's some lessons that can be learned there. So there's a host of different actions. And then I remember I grew up in LA and in the late 70s, there was extreme rationing because of the drought back then.
Right.
Swimming pools dried up.
Yep.
So I haven't seen that level of conservation yet. But maybe people can start thinking about the resource as a whole and what this means for the West as a whole and how do we survive as a whole. And that's going to require some real changes. And I think moving away from Kentucky bluegrass in your front yard and a pool in the back to denser living where you have community pools and people can go to the ocean or go to that community pool and not have a swimming pool in every backyard. Because when you fly over LA and you see all the swimming pools, it just raises my hackles. But then to add one last element, I think an additional challenge, and Chairman Tortez alluded to this, is there's still a lot of unquantified water owed to the tribes. And that's something that will need to be dealt with. There's been some investments, tribes along the river, the Gila River Indian community within Arizona, and then the Colorado River Indian tribes along the main stem were enabled Arizona to meet the DCP reductions, which is a huge lift. So we need to recognize that, but that there's a lot more that needs to be acknowledged in tribal water use and to help get basic potable water access for people in the United States right now who don't have that, which is shocking to me. So that was a lot. Thanks, Chris.
You bet. Thank you. Deputy Commissioner Palumbo, I think actually this is a good spot for you to come in, and then we're going to go to Adel and Sandy and Henry for kind of the California agency perspective, but maybe your thoughts on how can we collaborate as 7 states in the United States to come up with the volumes that are necessary to help Lakes Powell and Meade.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you also, Michael. You hit on a lot of key components of how we get there. Let me first talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and the $4 billion dedicated to the Colorado River Basin and other basins experiencing comparable levels of long-term drought, and how that can help bring the 7 basin states together as one component of getting to that 2 to 4. I think it's going to, as Adel said, as you said, as Henry said, it's all sectors. As Sandy said, it's all states. It's folks coming together to work on solutions. But with respect to that IRA funding, where Reclamation is going with that to help bring the 7 basin states together to get to that 400,000 acre feet reduction per year. Again, lots of compliments to the state of California. Chris, your leadership and the leadership throughout the base, the state on getting to that 400,000. So how do we do that? We need both short-term and long-term solutions. So we intend to issue a solicitation, if you will, for projects that promote system conservation in the lower basin. And we're going to be issuing that in the coming week, perhaps, to incentivize that conservation, if you will, on an annual basis. that's a short-term solution. That's a bridge. There's not really enough money in the world to have that short-term solution move on in perpetuity. We need then to couple that with long-term durable solutions for that foundation for that bridge to land on. In early 2023, we'll be issuing another solicitation for longer term system efficiency projects. Several items that Michael mentioned, which were right on, whether it's canal lining, whether it's re-regulating reservoirs, whether it's water recycling, whether it's turf removal, whether it's looking at rotational fallowing, land idling, marginal lands that could be taken out of production to allow for that to longer term solutions to be implemented. And of course, we also need to address the Salton Sea as part of that. We know that reduction in use in the lower basin in California, in particular, in the Imperial Valley, in particular, will result in less water making it to the sea, and there are deleterious effects both to humans and ecosystems as a result of that. So we need to use some of that funding to address Salton Sea issues in terms of mitigation. So that's just one element of where I think we need to focus on getting the 2 to 4. I'll turn it back to you, and if we have time, I can talk about other elements as well.
Thank you very much, David. That's actually really helpful. Sandy and Henry and Adel, given what you've heard, some of the challenges that Michael's laid out, that developing the relationship between Arizona, California, and Nevada to address reservoir evaporation, the challenges that the commissioners identified in coming up with the 2 to 4 million acre feet a year to stabilize the reservoir system, the dependence that each of you have in your agencies. How do you see kind of this, splitting it up and moving forward from a California and a lower basin perspective?
I'll jump in, and I would say that it really is a mix of all of the above. It's a portfolio approach. There isn't one silver bullet to solve this issue. And as was talked about, there's the short term and there's the long term.
Yeah.
And really appreciated the comments about the federal funding and how that's going to be rolled out, because that's going to be critical for immediately getting some wins. So I think it's an all of the above perspective. I would say that it needs to be not only within the lower basin, but the upper basin. We need to all be collectively in this together and not be singling out any one basin or any one particular state. I also think that we need to think creatively about how we can support each other and how we can share resources. As an example, we have the largest desal plant in the nation, and we have the ability to expand its capacity if there's demand for it. We don't have the demand for that in San Diego, but we could produce more water there and share it as a paper transfer with another agency. Again, I talked about intentionally created storage. When we have water, additional water in certain years, we could store that in the Colorado River to help with the elevations. So I think we just really have to think differently. I really believe that our QSA, even though next year it'll be 20 years old, it really provides a path for long-term. How do you create sustainable conservation? How do you take the impacts of those things and make sure that the environment is protected, the socioeconomic climate of the region that is doing the conservation is protected? And so I think we have some tools there. I think we're now finally at a point, it's taken a long time, but everyone sees the challenges going forward. As Michael talked about, in California, we are have a ban on watering non-functional turf. We're a little bit behind Nevada in that, but we're getting on board with it. So there's a lot of things that are in play. I think what California has offered up with this 400,000 acre feet worth of conservation shows that we're willing to be there front and center at the table, and we want to see everybody else there as well.
You know, I think from my perspective, and thank you, Sandy, for your comments. Being primarily an agriculture community has been a challenge to really as I mentioned before, the QSA started with a very aggressive conservation effort to maintain efficiency of production as well as saving water. And then over the years, we've successfully come up with a program that's fairly robust. As I mentioned before, the issue here, I think, to me, is making sure that in solving one crisis, we don't create another one. And frankly, as we see the situation in California in general, the shifting of crops has really gone from the Central Valley down to our area here, and also the Hagekhalil area south of the border. And again, because water is available here, there's more production here, which kind of creates a dynamic that's hard to overcome, because in essence, these crops are making it back to the marketplace, and they're commanding very high levels of compensation for that. So to incentivize more conservation, we need to really bring about a package to our farmers to say, invest in this type of technology. Long-term wise, we're looking also at how do we permanently change the irrigation processes in a way that basically makes it more efficient. And one of the discussions we've been having with our board and also with the federal government is basically electrifying our rural areas more so to provide what we call three-phase power. That is basically to establish pumping systems and irrigation systems for drip and sprinklers. Our system right now is not robust enough to handle those kind of issues, but it needs investment in the electric side to do so. That will bring about, again, more efficient use of water. And then, as David alluded to, was the issue of also looking at the aspect of the quality of the land, of the ground that we're using for farming. There's different grades and different types, and again, in segregating that activity and identifying those parcels that may not be suitable for farming or has low yield, again, becomes an element of where we can actually better utilize our land to produce crops and such. I think the other part of this issue, and I kind of alluded to the aspect, is that one of our challenges, we don't have a lot of other options, to be honest with you. We don't have the turfs that the metropolitan, the urban cities have to be able to target. We just don't have that ability to remove non-functional turf. But we do have to also include and consider the aspect of the other water uses that are coming forth aggressively. And frankly, just yesterday, we received a request for water allocation for geothermal facilities. Now, I guess the question, do we ignore that request at this point and basically retain that into a conservation effort back to the Colorado River, or reduce farming activities? And this is the dilemmas we're getting into now. It's kind of a second tier level, but it, in essence, goes back to the same source of the same resource that we're trying to use here and conserve is water for the river. So, you know, one of the challenges we see here coming for us very quickly is how do we manage this whole demand for water that is not there today, but is vital basically for the overall health and what I would say the economy of California, and meeting other objectives that aren't necessarily water related, but affect air quality and also environmental issues. So this is where it gets a little complex than just saying cut the water off and leave it in the river, because there are other initiatives that basically are nascent at this point. There are fundamental also to meeting the environmental requirements of global warming and so on and so forth. So let me just stop there and put that on the table as well as one of the complications we're going to run into here.
Well, I think I do want to say one thing. I think you make a very good point about we've also got to be careful in being able to maintain the integrity and function of prior agreements, such as the QSA, for example, because of just how important that is to California as well. So, Adel.
I agree with you. I mean, we need to protect the priority system. We need to protect the seniority and many things, but it doesn't take away our responsibility to conserve water. And I believe, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think what Sandy also talked about is no one left behind. And we believe that we all under the same tent, the watershed tent for the Colorado River, and we all have to take care of each other. We should not just point the finger just on Southern California and say, or the ag community in IID and PVID. We can't do that. We need to look at, I mean, we've done a lot in Southern California, and I will invite Michael to spend a little more time here down and learn about the things that we have done. I mean, the amount of money we spent on replacing turf, and we did 200 million square feet of turf. Sandy talked about the governor banning the watering of non-functional turf. The governor's water supply plan that talks about a 10% reduction in our water supply and how we make through this diverse portfolio. I think the solution, what I call the 3 I's, you've talked about it, the integration, innovation, and the inclusion that we all talk about, right? Those are the things that we need to talk about. But it's not just Southern California and the lower basin, it's all of us. It doesn't help us to have LA or San Diego or other parts of this region follow their turf, remove turf, which we want to do it. We're going to work hard. We are actually pushing. Our board took action last month on that area to develop model ordinances to move that. While we go down another part of our basin state in a large city where you have watering green lush plants everywhere. Or you ask our farmers in IID and PVID to fallow land, as we have been partnering with both of them, as we did with our Kitsan tribe down in Yuma and with the Bard Irrigation District on seasonal fallowing. And you go to other parts of the region that have farmers that can water and do anything they want without really concern. It does not help us. Doesn't help Henry, doesn't help any of us to have that discussion. I think the focus should be overall. And I think we need to step up, and that's what we're doing. The 2 solutions we have is, one is reduce demand right now through actions we need to do to shore up our system and protect the system. The second is how we can invest in optimization, new ideas to help our farmers still thrive and our community still be a community without, grass and with some balanced new water management practices to continue farming without having people lose jobs. And then the last thing we need to talk about is augmenting water supply. And we need to really focus about it. I know we talked, when I met with our partners in Mexico, and Henry and I, when we visited the board in IID, there's a water quality and health issue with the New River, where sewage is being put in and causing a problem both Mexico and in the States. And how about we put a recycling plant in that location to clean up the water and to reuse that water for irrigation, and that can help conserve water that we can back up in Lake Mead, right? That's solutions. And we have a partnership with Arizona and Nevada on our pure water Southern California, and basically leveraging that. And I'm working with my partners in the area to deliver water fast. I got the governor to put regulation and to have a bill to give us progressive design build. We're looking at delivering water while we're building the project by about 40,000 acre feet in West Basin and LADWP in the harbor area around Carson. But also, Sandy talked about, the idea of expanding desal that's already there and have that be purchased and then backed up and put up in Lake Mead. And I think we need to look at every option, every tool in the toolbox. But I just don't want people just to focus on just Southern California and our lower basins. We're here to play. We've always been leaders. We invested Metropolitan, we invested $840 million in conservation before anybody talked about conservation. Right. And we need to do more. We're willing to do more. And I'm so proud that the governor's office, and I know State Water Resource Board, is looking for ways to scale up conservation. And I believe also we're going to be working with the Bureau of Reclamation on bringing money in to remove and fallow turf. You know, we're going to basically go after non-functional turf. And we just did the mapping, and we're working by December. We would have a map of every non-functional turf that's industrial, commercial, and municipal in the entire Southern California area to help us focus, laser focus on going out there to make sure they're not watering the non-functional turf and give them the care to replace it with native plants that remove it. We're doing the work. We will look forward to the funding from the Bureau of Reclamation and the state, but we need partnership. And we can't forget our partners in the Indian tribes. And I will tell you, I visited last 2 days with the Kitsan tribe down in Yuma. We're partners with them on the seasonal fallowing as we do with BART, but also we're talking about what we can do more. So we talked about optimization. We talked about canal lining. We talked about solar panel cover to prevent evaporation. Those are ideas that I'm willing to step in, and I think all of us want to do the right thing to help us get to where we want to do. And this is an opportunity, the time where we have money and need and vision come together to get us to what we want to do. So I'm excited about it. I think we can do it together. And we want to do it like, Sandy said, everyone should be under the same tent and nobody should be left behind and nobody should point fingers at anyone. We're here to do it together.
Thank you very much, Adel. We've got 15 minutes left, and perhaps maybe it's appropriate at this point to have Deputy Commissioner Palumbo help us think about what we need to do as not only California water users. And Adel, I really appreciate you bringing to bear the notion that this is a statewide thing. It's a West-wide thing. We've all got to get creative and innovative in how we use these resources. Basin-wide consistency standards. And to that point, some of these things may not be able to slot in, David, like in 2023 or even 2024. It's going to take some time to figure out, precisely the path and the mechanism, develop the federal rules and regulations that are going to be required, maybe companion state rules, regulations, et cetera. But how do we then pivot, if you will, from the immediate need to stabilize the reservoir system, but at the same time, we've also got to be working on this package that's going to end up being the framework or the next set of operating guidelines that looks ahead, understanding what climate change is bringing us. How do we do that? And I just to start you off, it's my understanding that the United States wants to essentially formally kick off the next set of operating guidelines development process in early 2023. And so share with us the federal vision of both the process and what you think we've got to do to get ready for January 1, 2027, when those new guidelines need to be in place.
Thanks, Chris, for the question, and you're absolutely right. We need to focus not just on the now, both short and long-term solutions, but how do we operate the system after 2026? So where we see this going is issuing that Federal Register notice in early 2023 on the scoping for the post-2026 process. We anticipate there'll be a 2-year period on getting to a draft environmental impact statement. Working with the states, working with the tribes, working with the public to put together that draft EIS by the end of 2024, so a 2-year period. The things that we do now, today, literally today, through that period will help advise what that draft environmental impact statement looks like. There's some things we're going to try to implement that may not make it into the draft EIS. We may collectively decide that is not an effective tool, but there may be others that come about during this interim period that will be advisable to include in that draft EIS. So our schedule, again, public notice early 2023, work over the next 2 years to publish a draft EIS. At the same time, in parallel, these activities on voluntary reductions, both system conservation as well as system efficiency, that's got to move forward rapidly. Again, we'll likely advise the draft EIS and those other tools to get us through this period, this next 4-year period. You know, we are looking at prior decisions that have been made with respect to elevation management. And do we need to take emergency action and manage those elevations differently as soon as 2023? So we're commencing a process to get through so we can be prepared if need be, if we don't get the voluntary reductions, or if we have a hydrology that is realized, that is that one of those 30-year traces that you showed, Chris, below that. So we need to be prepared to act with different elevation management decisions. So we're moving forward with that. And as Michael indicated, and we talked about evaporation and seepage and figuring out how to do that in an equitable way that's durable from a legal perspective, we need to work with the states and the tribes and on that. And we're intending to embark on that process as well to be in a position in 2024 to implement those reductions. Again, we need to work with the states. We need to work with the tribes. We need to work with the public on that process. And I mention that because there's lots of work streams, if you will, moving forward in parallel. And it's going to take a concerted effort by all of us working together to get there.
Thank you. Chairman Tortez, you mentioned in your comments a few minutes ago, inclusivity for tribes and tribal needs and concerns is very important to you and the Torres Martinez band. And I guess as you think about the 7 basin states, all of the stakeholders across the basin, Mexico and the federal government working on this large comprehensive NEPA process to put together new operating guidelines, what do you expect? What do you want to see with respect to tribal inclusivity and participation in developing the next set of guidelines?
Thank you for that question, Chris. And as everyone knows, in 1922, when the Colorado River was divided and split up between the states, again, the tribes were excluded. And then for 100 years now, most of the tribes have been excluded. So I think what the tribes see now, this brought this, like with all catastrophes, the COVID, it brings light to the inequity, right, of the allocation of the Colorado River. So now the light is on the tribal share, and the tribes can now be at the table with respect to quantification and the infrastructure and how to get that water to their communities. So now with the tribes being able to come to the table and be part of true stakeholders in the water allocation, and I'm talking about not just tribes, and you mentioned Mexico, so we're talking about the indigenous population, right? All the true stakeholders. I believe we now have a voice that the drought and the demand from the federal government has brought to light. So I appreciate the fact that we will be speaking more on the subject with inclusivity, with webinars and forums like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And I'd open it up to the rest of you. Thoughts about this transition and what your expectations are and how you intend to participate in the next set of developing the next set of operating guidelines.
I mean, maybe I want to just talk about, this is a temporary thing to shore up the lake and everything. but we need to have serious discussion, a long-term discussion as what we need to do. You know, I know, and I know the federal money is not going to be here for long.
Right.
And this is my biggest concern, is the money here is for a short term and what happens next. So I keep talking about the investments that are being made in different parts of the watershed, such as desal in LA, or the recycled water in Orange County, more desal in other places, or brackish water cleanup, whatever we're doing, right? The investments are investments that are being done in the watershed, whether it's also in the ag community, it's being done in the watershed for the benefit of the watershed. And the best place to invest is in what is the things that are most cost effective. You can't just say it has to be done in California or has to be done in this. What is the best place to get it done? And that gives me that as a watershed, we need to have a watershed mentality, right? And watershed mentality is we need to figure out how we show up and manage the water is less now. And so my thinking is we may have to think outside the box here and start looking at, do we really need some kind of a governance, a watershed authority across the entire river, across the 7 states and Mexico, where we are actually collecting money across the base and then having money then be invested by some kind of a governance to invest money in different places to help us, versus all trying to fight each other over who pays for what and how we do it. So I think, to me, I want to also deal with the immediate issue, the interim with the 2026, but also look for the long term. We have a responsibility to really create the future for the next 100 years. And I think the way we are operating right now, it's not going to help us. We're very tribal. and that doesn't help. So I think we need to start thinking ahead. But I'll tell you, we need to start meeting more regularly as 7 states, have open dialogue. We really need to start putting things on the table and thinking outside this my area, or get rid of the I and put the we on. And I'll leave you with a quote that I picked up for today. And this is an author called Wallace Stigner. He said, "One cannot be pessimistic about the West. This is the native home of hope. The West is the native home of hope. And hope is what we're going to be doing together. And that's what we're going to do together. Deal with the immediate issue, prepare for the 26 guidelines in a collaborative way, but think ahead for the future, the next 100 years, for the future generations that we have." So thank you.
If I can chime in also, and Adel, thank you for your comments, and those were very insightful and productive. I think part of the other issue, and going back to, I think, David's comments in regards to the crisis we find ourselves in, I think collectively across the basin, we got to think about the 80-20 rule, where you have 80% of the benefits with 20% of the effort. And again, I don't think we really backed up into that mentality for the whole basin. We've been targeting volume users, high users, et cetera, but really as where the water is being used and the benefits generated by that water, where do we see the actual low probability of use or high probability of success, and focus on those first as we start really kind of prioritizing where do we target and how do we maximize the water that's going to be available for not only now, but for the future. And I think the compacts that we have now don't necessarily point us in that direction, or really encourage us to look at it from that perspective. And so I think there has to be a pivoting or a shift change of thinking here going forward as to how to really be effective. If the numbers of the inflows come in, I think we're talking right now going from 14 million to 12 million and maybe to 11 million acre feet of water in the future. How does that then in the calculus, affect, in essence, the whole basin and its water use? And I think this is an opportunity, I think, for us to kind of start thinking a little more collectively in a different format than staying where we are today, which is basically looking backwards rather than looking
Right.
forwards. So
Right.
anyway, just a couple of thoughts on that.
And I would say going forward, I think we have all reached the point that we understand the scarcity of water on the Colorado River, and that there are no magic answers, and there is no more free water. And we worked on that 30 years ago, starting to acknowledge that we needed to do things differently. And our ratepayers invested in that diversification. And so it has to be a combination. It's not going to be all federal dollars. It's not going to be all state dollars. The cost of water is going up, and areas are going to have to grapple with that and make those investments for the sustainability of the 7 basin states and the quality of life. And there is no free lunch. We paid for the canal lining. We paid for the on-farm conservation practices. We paid for the desal. We've paid for conservation. And I think we just have to get real about the fact that those investments are going to impact all of us and all of our pocketbooks to be able to get the sustainability going forward. And there's no easy way to mitigate that. It's just, we're going to have to take it on.
Toward that end, thanks, Sandy. I appreciate all of your comments, all of you. This has been really a great panel, and thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I agree. I think we've got the necessary tools. We've got smart people across the Colorado River Basin, across the state of California, across the West. But it's going to involve an awful lot of effort, dedication, and commitment for us to make the changes that we're going to need to make going forward to ensure that future generations can appreciate and enjoy the quality of life that all of us have. And hopefully we can improve things as we're going. Charlie, I think we're about out of time, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. And thank you to our panel, our sponsors, and most importantly, I want to thank the participants that sat in through today's conversation. This has been, as we opened, an incredibly robust conversation, but I think it also highlighted what we knew going in. This is an incredibly complex issue, and it impacts not just a particular subregion, but it really is the entirety of the Southwest and other states when we talk about water sustainability across California and Southern California. I think it showed me, in terms of listening to what you all have said, we fit a much larger context, and that we need to bridge not just the current dry spell, but we got long-term solutions we really need to design and we need to implement, and that requires action. So while Adel and most all of you have talked about the need for the conversation, we need to collaborate. Good news is we are collaborating. Bad news, there's a lot of people that need to collaborate. And so getting consensus, and in that weights and balances of how do we bridge, and then how do we plan for the future, and most importantly, do it for the constituents that we serve, and making it affordable, making it equitable and accessible to some of those who are in most need. That is an incredible challenge that we have. And here at the Water Coalition, this is what we're for, is to bring this kind of education. And then from the education, people will be informed to take action as these public policy issues then come to the table, and decision makers can make it an informed decision. So we thank you all again for being a part of today's discussion. We look forward to this conversation in the future. I think we got lots to do going forward, and I think we got many more of these webinars specifically that we can host. But for all of you, again, thank you for being with us. If I leave you with anything, it's act now, moving. It takes 10, 15 years for some of the solutions we're talking about. So, as they used to say in one of my favorite musicals, don't dawdle, Amarillo, we got to go. So thank you all for being with us. I very much appreciate you being a part of today's discussion. We look forward to hosting more of these into the future. Well, thanks for joining us on What Matters Water TV and Podcast. If you like today's discussion, go to wherever you download your podcasts and give us that 5-star rating. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. That'll help us build our presence in this new world and on this format. If you're interested in helping sponsor one of these programs, please reach out to us at socalwater.org and send us a message. As we close today's show, I leave you with this challenge. Be a part of the conversation. Be a part of the solution. At the Southern California Water Coalition, we educate to advocate. So as public policy leaders may have difficult choices, together we help them make informed decisions. Thanks for being with us. We will see you again next time on What Matters Water TV and Podcasting.